Good evening, everybody. It's a really brilliant event tonight because we have finally been able to bring Lucy Cooke, the author of Bitch, here to Radical Anthropology. Lucy's a broadcaster, documentary filmmaker. She's a zoologist by background, so she's going to be telling us all kinds of fun and amazing facts about all kinds of critters. But a lot of what Lucy has to say is extremely relevant to the anthropology of human evolution, and I'm sure that that's going to come out in the discussion. Her focus is really on how the scientific or the non-scientific patriarchy has failed to see in front of it what females are doing in their strategies across so many species. But I'm going to hand over to Lucy to take us through.
Thank you so much. Well, it's so great to be here. As I say, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm a zoologist. I studied many moons ago, and I actually wanted to come to UCL. I applied to UCL and to Oxford, and I wanted to come to UCL because I thought it was a lot cooler. But my dad cried when I got into Oxford because no one in my family has even been to university, let alone Oxford. So I couldn't let my dad down. So it's a real thrill to be here, and I'm very honoured to be here, standing here as opposed to sitting there. So anyway, so yes. Bitch, that's what I'm here to talk to you about, my latest book, which is all about how female animals have been marginalised and misunderstood by the scientific patriarchy. Starting with this guy, Charles Darwin. It didn't actually start with Darwin, it started with Aristotle, actually, because he was the first really to say that females were passive and males were active. But Darwin really ran with it in his The Descent of Man, which outlined his theory of sexual selection, his difficult second album, as it were. The follow-up to On the Origin of the Species, which obviously outlined the theory of evolution by natural selection. In The Descent of Man, he talks about how the differences between males and females, which really he saw males and females as very, very different. Here's one of the quotes from The Descent of Man. The males of almost all species have stronger passions than the females. Hence it is the males that fight together and sedulously display their charms before the females. And the female, on the other hand, with the rarest of exceptions, is less eager than the male. She generally requires to be courted. She is coy. So this is the idea that that females are really a feminine footnote to the macho main event. It is males that are the dominant drivers of evolutionary change. What's fascinating to me is Darwin is obviously, I studied evolutionary biology. Darwin is a meticulous, fantastic scientist, a brilliant man, but yet he was blindsided by the culture of the time. And I think that's really, if Darwin can be blindsided by cultural bias, I think that's sort of a lesson for us all, really, because he was an incredibly meticulous scientist. And of course the problem with or the effect of somebody as brilliant and influential as Darwin of branding females in the shape of a Victorian housewife, basically, is that for over 100 years, the scientists that followed in his wake suffered from a chronic case of confirmation bias and were heavily influenced by Darwin's paradigm. And of course, try telling a female spotted hyena that she needs to be passive and coy, and she'll laugh in your face after she's bitten it off. We now understand that females can be just as dominant, aggressive, promiscuous, as males. It's just that for a long time, scientists wouldn't, or perhaps couldn't see them that way. But thankfully, things are starting to change, and in the last, really sort of since the early 1980s. Our understanding of females have changed, and there's been something of a revolution going on. And today I'm going to talk to you about some of the female animals and the scientists behind that are studying them, that are behind that revolution. And we'll kick off with the lioness, as to start off with the lioness, the queen of the jungle. because this was really the start of my questioning, because, you know, I was taught at university, you know, I was taught the standard sexual selection, Darwinian sexual selection, and about 15 years ago, I found myself, I was making a documentary for the BBC about animal communication, and I found myself trying to have a conversation with a lion in the Serengeti. And I was with a lion expert, and it actually, as many of you will know, it's actually not that difficult to have a conversation with a lion. All you need is the recording of a lion's roar, something to play it out of, and something to hide in, preferably with wheels. So there we were. I was in the Serengeti. I was with Dr. Seifert, who is an expert in lions, and we got our recording of a lion's roar, and the whole thing seemed so improbable to me that it was going to work. Because, you know, first of all, I mean, many of you all know a lion's roar doesn't sound like the beginning of an MGM movie. It's nothing like as majestic. And that's actually a tiger, apparently. It's not a lion. Because it wasn't considered to be lion enough like that roar, you know, the kind of roar. Because they don't sound like that, lions. They sound more like the sort of sound that, I don't know, Boris Johnson probably makes at midnight when he's looking for cheese. It's a sort of a noise. So it's not, you know, this whole thing seems so improbable, this kind of tinny speaker, and, you know, this sound that didn't sound like what I thought a lion's roar should sound like, you know, and we started blasting it out into the gloom. But it worked. You know, there was the sound of another lion came back in the gloom, you know, in the distance there was a sort of ooh, ooh. And then for about 5 minutes that we played audio ping pong with this lion, and it got closer and closer and closer until I got goosebumps, you know, and then out of the darkness appeared not one but 3 lions, 2 males and a female. And the males, when there was nothing there that looked or smelt like a male lion, they just went off. But the female, she lay in front of our Land Rover, legs akimbo, and pinned us to the spot for 2 hours. And we were stuck. We couldn't move because she was there. And so, you know, during this very long wait, I said to Dr. Seifert, you know, what's going on? And he goes, oh, she wants to mate with us. He was German. And I was like, but isn't she mating with one of those males that she's with? He's like, oh yeah. Don't you know, as a female lioness, she's incredibly promiscuous, and she'll mate maybe 100 times with multiple males during her fertility period. I was like, no, I didn't know that. Like, no one told me that before. That was news to me. And so that was the first time I was like, whoa, that is not what I was taught. That's not how I understand things. Of course, now we know why the female lioness mates with multiple males. She's not just being wanton for the sake of it. She's actually, it's a strategy. And we have this woman to thank for understanding what that strategy is. And this is Sarah Blaffer Hrdy, who I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And if you aren't familiar with Sarah Blaffer Hrdy, then you should go to the library immediately, because she's brilliant. She's a sort of pioneer, really, in addressing these stereotypes, and really, the first, one of the very first scientists to sort of go into the field, have the same, be privy to the same education as men, and take her knowledge into the field and her curiosity, and to ask questions from a female perspective. And here she is in India studying langurs. You can just make them out. And she noticed she'd been sent out to India she was looking at infanticide, and because there had been reports of male infanticide, and she noticed that also that the females were soliciting sex with multiple males, and instead of just brushing it to one side as an inconvenient anomaly, she was really the first person to go, well, that's really interesting, why is that? And she found that it was, as I'm sure many of you here already know, she found that it was connected with the infanticide, and that male langurs, are when they come into a territory, they may well be infanticidal and kill the offspring of the females that are there. And that's to force the females into estrus, so that, you know, if their females are nursing, then they're not available to mate with, and so by killing the babies, that forces the females into estrus. They're ready to have their babies. Great strategy. But the females have a counter strategy, and that's to mate with multiple males, and so therefore if the males have mated recently with a female, they're less likely to kill their babies. So she was really the first person to show that females are just as sexually strategic as males, and that strategy often includes mating with multiple males. And although there was some resistance to her theory when it first came out, it's now known that there are, you know, I think there's over 50 or 60 species where females are mating with multiple males in order to prevent infanticide. And in some cases they're doing so extremely enthusiastically. There was a study of Barbary macaques where there was one female was recorded having sex every 17 minutes with every sexually mature male in the group, of which there were 11, which sounds positively exhausting. But you'll be pleased to know that females do gain some pleasure from this. This is a monkey's O-face. This is the only illustration in my book, in fact, and it was in a paper that was written about the orgasmic potential of macaques. This is the orgasmic face of a male, or the classic round-mouthed frown face that both males and females display when having sex and when climaxing. But you know, the female orgasm, Sarah Blaffer Hrdy writes about this, is another one of those areas that was completely sort of dismissed. It was, the idea was that only humans, that females could be orgasmic, and the only reason why was because of the homologous development, the same development trajectory that we have with males, and so basically we owe males our orgasms, which, you know, is an astonishing thing, bold thing to say, but there have subsequently been, it looks like there, and it was thought that only human females would have orgasms, but now, thanks to various studies, it's thought that other female primates do, which makes sense, because if they're having lots of sex, then it makes sense for them to be rewarded. The idea that females wouldn't get pleasure from sex seems extremely Victorian. So we have Sarah Blaffer Hrdy to thank for that. So when I was researching my book, she was one of the first people that I wanted to get in touch with, and I reached out to her. And she said, yeah, come and visit me on my walnut farm. So I went to go and see her, and she was just amazing. She baked me a pie. She listened to my last, they got my last book on audiobook, and she goes, oh, I know you like vultures, so I baked you a vulture pie. It doesn't have actual vultures in it. It was a chicken pie, but she put plastic vultures on top. But she was just incredibly warm and generous with her knowledge, and I'm incredibly grateful to her. I mean, she is an astonishing academic, who's, you know, really revolutionary, completely brilliant, and just incredibly generous, and yeah, it was absolutely wonderful. And even better than that, when I reached out to her, she said, oh, and you might be interested in my housemates. And I certainly was, because she was staying with her at the time with Jean Altman and Mary Jane West Eberhard. And together they call themselves the Broads, and they are the rabble-rousing matriarchs of modern Darwinism. Really, these women, fought the scientific philosophy with hard-won data, and won basically, and really redefined how we understand what it means to be female. There's a fourth member of that, and they meet every year. To be honest with you, I don't know. I think I might have been privy to their very last cerebral jamboree, because after that was 2019, and then COVID hit pretty much. And so since then, I don't know whether they're all still meeting, which is a great shame. I think they meet remotely, but there's a fourth member of their clan, and that's Patricia Goarty, who's also just this absolutely incredible scientist. And I didn't get to meet Patricia because she wasn't there, but this is how I would see her lovely, warm, smiling face on Skype, and we spoke a lot over Skype when I was writing the book. And again, she was incredibly generous with her knowledge, absolutely brilliant woman. And you know, these women, you know, they're referred to as feminist Darwinists because, you know, they're not saying that Darwin was all wrong. It's just that he viewed the world through a Victorian pinhole camera, and we're now able to see the animal kingdom in its technicolor version, and it's all the more interesting for it. And Patricia has been, you know, revolutionary in her own way. Many important experiments that she's done challenging this sort of Darwinian paradigm. And one of her earliest works was with birds, with eastern bluebirds, sorry. You know, we think of songbirds really as the very picture of monogamy. You know, you often see songbirds, they're nesting outside your house, and you know, there'll be a male and he'll sing for the female, and then they'll build a nest together, and then together they'll raise the chicks. And so, you know, very easy for us to imprint our values on them, and they look like it's just a lovely, harmonious, monogamous situation that's going on there. And Patty was really one of the first to sort of think, well, I wonder if it really is, you know, all sweetness and light as it seems to be. So what she did was she co-opted forensic technology and was the very first person to use DNA fingerprinting on a clutch of eggs, and to see whether, well, do they all have the same father? And she found that they didn't, and that a clutch of eggs frequently had multiple fathers. And this was a you know, a revolutionary finding. And when she presented her data at an ornithological conference, a very famous ornithologist, Steve Emlin, in fact, said to her, you know, that can't be, the only way that would be possible is if the females were raped. And Patty was like, well, I don't think so. Because, you know, it's impossible for female songbirds to be raped because, you know, the male and female both have a cloaca, the male doesn't have a penis. In order for the male to inseminate the female, he has to balance on her back, precariously line up cloacas. You know, if the female's not into it, she can just fly away at any point. So the idea that she's being, and also Patty quite rightly objects to that terminology, if the females are being coerced, it's just not possible. There are species, ducks for example, where coercion does occur, but you know, it's not possible in songbirds. But it took that's how sticky these stereotypes are. You know, that even when presented with hard data, that it can't be true. And that was the idea that females were being coerced. Was prevalent until other female ornithologists basically put radio trackers on the backs of female birds and tracked their movements and saw that they were flying into other males' territories and soliciting sex. And so it was actually the females were being strategic, you know, and you know, as far as Patty's concerned, it's really obvious. You know, why put all your eggs in one basket? You know, it's much more, you're much more likely to find genetic compatibility or good genes if you invest your eggs in several different fathers. And really this work, and we now know that only 7% of birds are monogamous, and even swans are unfaithful. So, you know, and it's probably even less than that. So it sparked a polyandry revolution, and we now know that lions and lizards and lobsters are all, the females have a strategy for mating with multiple males. So that's promiscuity. Females are just as will mate with multiple males just as much as males do. But what about competitiveness and aggression? That's something that we see is an unfeminine. You know, it's thought that, you know, males are the competitive and aggressive sex. Well, that's not true either. I'd like to introduce you now to the animal kingdom's most murderous mammal, which is actually a female. It's not me. It's the meerkat, the much-loved meerkat, the star of cozy Sunday night telly. And meerkats there was a survey that was done of 1,000 mammals, looking at which mammal was most likely to be killed by a member of its own species, and number 1 was the meerkat. Number 2 was humans. So. And that's because meerkat society is predicated on ruthless competition between females. They live in family clans, and the dominant female doesn't want any of the other females to reproduce. She wants to dominate those resources. And so if any of the females does, then they will be evicted from the clan, and that's basically, in the Kalahari, that's tantamount to murder. But they're allowed back in if they will wet nurse their murderous babies instead. So that's pretty brutal, but it's a very effective strategy. It means that she's able to put all of her energy into having pups and not necessarily nursing them. And that particular structure is called cooperative breeding, which always sort of seemed like a very strange euphemistic way of describing society. It doesn't seem particularly cooperative. It's more like reproductive despotism. But yeah, it's incredibly successful strategy, and it's, you know, it's down to female competition. Of course, the queens of the cooperative lifestyle are the social insects. They've really taken it to the next level, where you just have one breeding female and none of the other members of the colony will breed. They're just supporting the royal reproductiveness, and probably the most successful of all are the termites. In fact, I think I can never believe these statistics, but a single queen can lay over 20,000 eggs a day and is capable of producing 146 million termites in her lifetime, which is incredible. And obviously, so, you know, in order to do so, she you know, her abdomen swells, and, you know, they have these other castes of workers that are supporting her in that extraordinary reproductive endeavour. And it's, you know, the social insects have been inspiration for sci-fi, dystopian societies, and it's always just comforting that they are, you know, they're insects. They're not mammals. There's nothing like that. Nothing's really creepy and strange like that happens in mammals. Well, it does actually. That's the thing. And there is a mammal that is classed as being eusocial, and that is this character here, which many of you will know. Anybody here? Naked mole rat, yeah, exactly. Which is one of the strangest and most fantastic creatures on the planet. It often tops the ugly animal charts. And Chris Fawkes, who's here in London, who studies them, he himself describes them as a penis with teeth. Which, you know, I think doesn't say much for Chris actually, but anyway, that's his words, not mine. Anyway, I've been fascinated with naked mole rats because they're fantastically weird, but you never get to see them because they live in colonies underground in East Africa, in really dangerous parts of East Africa as well. So they're incredibly difficult to see in the wild. And I did eventually manage to meet one, and that was in a very hot cupboard in East London, where Chris has created a facsimile of their underground life in this very warm cupboard using a load of old Tupperware and plastic tubing, which is a fantastic Heath Robinson affair, but has meant that he's able to observe their extraordinarily strange society. And they do have only one female that reproduces at a time. So, I mean, their colonies can be up to 300. You have one female, she'll have 2 or 3 male mates that she reproduces with, and no other members of the colony will breed. They can't, because she's suppressing their reproduction. They haven't gone through puberty, which is astonishing. I mean, it's an incredible feat. So what Chris has been trying to work out is, how does she do that? What's she doing? And what he's worked out is that she basically does it by being a big royal bully. So unlike, I've got a little video here. Let's see if this works. Here we go. So these are the female exerts her dominance by physically, she's on the move the whole time, patrolling the colony, and then walking over or pulling and shoving, biting. Look, I'm the boss here, and then clambering over her subjects, and that's exerting her dominance in this kind of really aggressive way. And that he thinks that's suppressing their hormones and meaning that they don't sexually mature. And of course this system works all the time. The queen is dominant and she's going around on a big royal bullying tour. But if she becomes weak and can no longer do that, then all hell breaks loose, basically, because females will then go through puberty, become sexually mature, and then start fighting to the death. Because this is their one chance. If they get to be queen, this is their one chance of reproducing in their lifetime. So, and he said, oh, it all gets terribly Game of Thrones, and there's blood splattered all over the tubes, and it's all really horrifying. But I mean, you know, again, incredibly successful. The females are able to have litters of up to 27 because that's all they're doing is reproducing. All the other members of the society are caring for their young. And one female was documented as having more than 900 pups in 24 years, which is astonishing. I mean, this is a creature this size. I mean, 900 in a lifetime. And they're like the Dorian Greys of the animal kingdom, of the mammal kingdom, because they don't age. The queens don't age. Their telomeres don't shorten. They're like there's sort of Silicon Valley is obsessed with aging and reversing aging, and there's sort of various labs there studying naked mole rats. But the face of eternal youth ain't pretty, but is available to you if you live underground in Kenya in a despotic society. But you'll be pleased to hear that female leadership and dominance isn't always quite so brutal. These are orcas, and they are, as many of you all know, they're basically danger dolphins. They're the sort of souped up members of the dolphin family, and they live in family pods. And it was always thought that, it's a great example of bias, it was always assumed that the males were the leaders because they're the bigger ones, and of course the males are in charge. But now we know that it's not just it's not the males that are the leaders of the Orca society. It's the females. In fact, it's the postmenopausal grannies that are the leaders of Orca society. And this is really interesting because menopause is incredibly rare in the animal kingdom, and for a long time humans were thought of as menopausal freaks. And then for a long time, it was the only other animals that went through menopause were in zoos, basically. There were, various gorillas and chimpanzees that have been documented living beyond their reproductive shelf life. And so, there were people that suggested that there was scientists that proposed that women were the same, that we were basically propped up by modern medicine and regular meals, and that we should be bowing out round about now alongside our ovaries, which is astonishing, but that was the case. So but we're not alone. It turns out there are other, and there's probably more because it just hasn't been studied, but we do know that there are 4 species of toothed whale that all go through the menopause, and the females all live beyond their reproductive fitness. And they are orcas, short-fin pilot whales, narwhals, and beluga whales. And it seems quite random, doesn't it, that there be us and these guys, but it looks like it's to do with it's the way that the society is. What's interesting, orcas are the ones that have been studied the most, and interestingly about orca society, these pods, that neither the males nor the females disperse, so they stay in these family pods, and really, so the females don't compete with their daughters for over resources. They don't, rather than the meerkats and sort of evicting them or bullying them into not reproducing, they're basically bowing out of the competition and instead investing their their energy in supporting their daughters, and actually in particular their sons, because if the females invest a lot in a son that becomes really big and sexually successful, then his offspring will be in other pods and won't be an energetic drain on her pod. So the females actually invest preferentially in the males, but they stop reproducing, and so they can invest in their sons and not compete with their daughters. Which obviously sort of falls in line with Kristen Hawke's grandmother theory, and at Exeter, Darren Croft at Exeter is the one who's been studying that. But you might be wondering, how do you study menopause in a 6-ton swimming torpedo with teeth? I know, like, how do you do that? How do you know, you can't take blood samples every day. But what you do is you take fecal samples, or you gather fecal samples, I should say, rather, which is, here I am, that's me with a Tupperware box of orca feces. Obviously it doesn't arrive like that. That was just where it had been collected and to be sent off to the lab to have the hormones studied in it. But even I arrived on the boat with Dr. Giles, who's the official orca pooper scooper, who's the one who collects the orca feces. And she handed me a net, and I was like, she goes, "Don't worry, whales do floaters, big ones." And we've got help. And the help in finding the orca feces was in the shape of Eba, which was this lovely dog as a former street dog from Sacramento that had been rescued and then taught to sniff out orca poop. So the orca poop that in the Tupperware was the test smell that it was used to train the dog up, and then Eba that's Eba hard at work in her office, sniffing out orca poop, which I thought was incredibly charming. And she could smell, obviously from a nautical mile away, much better than any of us could. But I was incredibly moved by Orca Society and how inclusive it is. Orcas are extraordinary creatures. They have amazing brains that are really a magnet for superlatives. They weigh 7 kilos and they have more surface area for cognitive thought than any other animal on the planet. And they also have this extra lobe, a paralimbic lobe, that is only found in dolphins and orcas. And where it sits in the brain, it suggests that that they are processing emotions and empathy in a dimension that we can't possibly understand. And they are incredibly cohesive and close as creatures. And this individual here has scoliosis. It has a bent spine. You can see it's got a bent fin, and you might expect that individual to not live as long as the others in the pod, but it was documented as living a long and healthy life because it was cared for and supported by the matriarch and the other members of the society. So I found the orcas to be incredibly inspiring, and you sort of just wish that we could evolve a paralimbic lobe, maybe, or at least our leaders could evolve a paralimbic lobe and be as supportive. But what about primates? We'd sort of led to believe that patriarchy is burnt into our DNA, and here's a quote from 1970 from Lionel Tiger: "Primate females seem biologically unprogrammed to dominate political systems." Well, I don't need to tell any of you. You'll all know that that's complete rubbish, and that most primate societies, that the females have their own matriline, and that there's, that's incredibly powerful. It's often the stable sort of nucleus of the society, and any of you go out in the field with primatologists, they'll tell you often if you could spend your day chasing monkeys and you want to know which way you want to keep up with them, you don't follow the alpha male, you follow the alpha female if you want to keep up. And there's a huge amount of politicking going on, especially in baboons. But yet, what we are, the stories that we like to tell and the stories that we like to tell our children are that males are in charge, right? So you'll be familiar with this character. This is King Julian. He's a ring-tailed lemur. He was the king of Madagascar in the film Madagascar. thing is, you know, you go to Madagascar, there's no sign of King Julian because ring-tailed lemurs, as many of you will know, are a female-dominant society. Of course, it was Alison Jolly, brilliant primatologist Alison Jolly, who worked that out back in the 1960s, I think it was. That she was really a pioneer in all of this. And I went to Madagascar to find out for myself what the ring-tailed lemurs were like, and this is what I found them doing. They were sunbathing. So when they in the oh, it's a shame. Here we go. So there you go. Look, you can see them sunbathing. They sleep in these caves that are really cold at night, and then they come out in the morning and they like to soak up the sun like a boss. Look at that. Like, it's so fantastic. And you know, God forbid any male would take the best sunbathing spot, because the females would just whack them. You know, if the males are eating something that the females want to eat, they'll whack them. You know, they are. You know, as Alison Jolly said, males are frightened of females. They are very aggressively dominant, and they do the majority of the scent marking and the patrolling, all these sort of roles that are traditionally associated with males. And it's not just the ringtails. While I was in Madagascar, I was lucky to get up close and personal with quite a few different lemur species, and on all of these species, of the 111 species of lemur, I think 90% are female dominant. And you know, whether they are like the fantastic Indri, which is the biggest of them all, that's in the top left there, which is actually in monogamous pairs, or whether they are in sort of, you know, different types of, you know, polyandrous or polygynandrous societies, the females are still dominant. So it's very interesting. And of course, you know, they don't look like primates, but we know that they are primates. So you can sort of see. I thought I was really fixated by their hands. You can really see they are, of course, our most ancestral cousins. And but you know, they are primates, and because 90% of the 111 species are female dominant, but also the other prosimians are also female dominant. There's been 2 papers that have been written that both from the taxonomic side, but also Rebecca Lewis, who studies the behaviour of lemurs, that suggests that the ancestor of humans and the ancestor of all primates must have been female dominant, because all the prosimians are mostly female dominant, but yet, you know, what we think of when we think of primates, we think of you know, male aggression. That's the story that we're most familiar with, you know, and it's chimpanzees that are obviously that have been the sort of the traditional model for human ancestry. But you know, I don't need to tell you guys in the room, because many of you will already know that we have another closest relative, the bonobo. This sassy character I met in San Diego Zoo. This is Loretta. I went to go and meet with Amy Parrish, who was amongst the first to propose that bonobo society was very different from chimpanzee society, and where chimpanzees are basically considered to be patriarchal and warlike, bonobos are actually matriarchal and peaceful. And Loretta was very much part of that discovery. Loretta is the matriarch of the San Diego bonobos. Obviously, in the wild, it's a slightly different setup. The females are often dominant, but not always dominant. But nevertheless, it's generally accepted that females are dominant, the dominant sex. And what's interesting is that, like chimpanzees, the females are smaller, so and also they're the sex that disperses. So, you know, but when they are able to sort of form strong bonds, whereas chimpanzees don't, and of course they do so by having sex with each other. So the females are have what's called GG rubbing, and Amy assures that they get a lot of fun out of it. And when a female joins a group, she will go up and sex is basically the social lubricant that forms bonds and prevents them from competing with one another. And so they form this very strong sisterhood, which means that the males don't overpower them and don't dominate them. So basically, female bonobos have overthrown the patriarchy through ecstatic same-sex frottage, which is one way of doing it, it's just really fascinating, because it just goes to show that, these ideas that dominance is related to sex. It's, clearly what sex you are, rather than sex as in sexual activity, is clearly, completely not the case, and it's obviously got a lot more complicated than that, to do with the environment and all sorts of things. But what's really fascinating is, anthropologists, you can argue forever about which makes the best model for human society. It would be fantastic to know what you think, whether you think it's chimpanzee or do you think it's bonobo. Which is it? Which is the better? Which we more likely to be like? Well, I guess we'll never really know. But what this shows is the flexibility of dominance, but also the flexibility of sexuality. Because Frans de Waal and Amy Parish, they say that basically all bonobos are fundamentally bisexual. So, I think that's really interesting that they have that flexibility, and that really was interesting to me, because I went in search, when I was writing this book, of sexist bias, and then I stumbled upon another form of bias which tripped me up and I wasn't expecting to find, and that's heteronormative bias. And here's a great example of that. This is a Laysan albatross. This is on the island of Hawaii. And these albatross have been studied for over 50 years. And there's a colony there. And what's interesting about them is that, albatross, seen as that sort of picture of monogamy, that they often do mate for life, not always, but they often do. And the female will lay one egg, and it takes them 6 months to raise the chick, because and you've got to have a strong partnership in order to do that, because it involves tag teaming, forays for many thousands of miles in search of squid to feed the chick, and it takes them 6 months to fledge. But what was interesting about this colony and others is that there was a phenomenon where they'd find some nests had 2 eggs. And, it's completely impossible for a female to lay 2 eggs. It's too energetically expensive. So what's going on there? So lots of sort of tortured explanations of why there would be these 2 eggs, what was going on. And eventually, Lindsay Young, who's the scientist in the background of that photo there, she was like, well, has anybody checked that they're male and female on these nests? And no one had. Everyone had just assumed for 50 years that of course they're male and female on the nest, that they look the same. Of course they are. Why would they be anything else? Well, she took feathers from every single nest, and to her complete surprise, she found that 1/3 of the nests in the colony were female-female pairs. And she was so shocked by her discovery that she did her lab work a second time. She didn't get all the feathers and checked it a second time, because she thought, no one's going to believe me. No one's going to believe that this is the case. And basically what happens is, in this colony in Oahu, it's a relatively new colony. Most of the Laysan albatross nest on one of these atolls nearby. And the females are kind of pioneers in every sense of the word, that they are the sex that disperses. So in these new colonies, there tends to be more females than there are males. And so the females that are there are basically they'll mate with any available male that's up for it, and then they'll get together with another female in order to raise the chicks, and they'll both lay an egg, and not both can be not both will fledge. Both eggs won't hatch because they can't. It's random actually which one. She thinks that they're not really able to tell which one's their egg, but some of these females will mate with a female, will partner with a female one season, and then maybe the next season they'll partner with a male. But some of these female partnerships just work, and they last for many years. And there was one female that I met there who had been with her partner since Lindsay had been studying, and it was 17 years that she'd been with her partner. And it was a relationship that just worked, you know. And so they would get together, and they spend their 6 months off on the wing, you know, and then when they would greet each other, they would do all the dances and the mooing and the cooing and all of the preening and mounting that creates all that bird oxytocin, which is forming that bond. And they'd had 8 chicks together and 3 grandchicks, and they were amongst the most successful pairs on the colony. The different males, it was random which male, it wasn't always the same male that they would use as a sperm donor, but you know, so I thought that was absolutely amazing, and another great example of just the plasticity of sexual behaviour. And of course, the more we look into it, you know, this idea that men are from Mars and females are from Venus and pink and blue brains, it's just, you know, it's a fantastic piece of branding, but the more we look into it, we're finding the more that male and female brains are basically the same. I mean, another great example is the urge to nurture, the maternal instinct. You know, this is something that, you know, we're told is something that's peculiar to females and that we're born with it. You know, well, we now know Catherine Dulac at Harvard, who studies mice, and Lauren O'Connell, who's at Stanford and studies frogs, they found exactly the same neural architecture that triggers the nurturing instinct in mice and frogs. It's exactly the same, and likely Catherine Dulac says that it'll be the same in humans, and it's exactly the same in males and females, and it's an instinct for nurturing, and it needs to be triggered. So there you go, another one of those great differences between male and female brains that turns out to be the same. And of course, it makes sense when you understand. It makes sense that we would be, you know, more or less the same. And it's most obvious, of course, in animals that are able to change sex. And these are anemone fish. They're one of the 500 species of fish that's able to switch sex. And of course, they're famous from Finding Nemo. And in an anemone fish, the male and female do form a kind of a monogamous partnership, actually. And you'll have and I can never say this, in an anemone, you'll have a male and female, and then there'll be several immature males. But if the female, she's the dominant sex, she's bigger than the male, if she's taken out by, say, a hungry barracuda, then the male will change into being the dominant female. Her male partner will change into being the dominant female, and one of the immature males will become sexually mature and become her partner, which of course means that in a biologically accurate version of Finding Nemo, in which little Nemo loses his mum and then goes on a big adventure and is reunited with his dad at the end of the movie, would be a very different film. But what's really interesting is Justin Rhodes, who I spoke to, who's at the University of Illinois, I think, who studies this change from male to female. And he's got like a whole lab full of anemone fish. And he was telling me that what's fascinating is that the fish basically, as soon as you remove the dominant female, her male partner starts behaving like a female and is recognized as a female by the other fish. But the gonads take up to a year to change from being testes to ovaries. So what's really fascinating about this is that, you know, obviously we define sex, biological sex, by the gonads, and so in this case, you know, the gonads are still male. But I said to Justin, you know, what sex is that fish? And he goes, well, if you ask the fish would tell you it's female. You know, so it would seem that certainly in the fish, in the anemone fish, that these, gender identity, which is gender is something that we don't consider that animals have, but in this case you can ask the fish what sex it is, you know, what gender does it think it is, and it would be different to its biological sex. So those systems may be independently regulated, which is really interesting. So there you go. There's some of the bitches in bitch. And they really sort of defy outdated binary stereotypes of bodies, brains and behaviour. And they teach us that sex is no crystal ball. It's neither static nor deterministic. It's a flexible trait just like any other that's shaped by the peculiar interaction of shared genes and the environment. And, you know, the time has perhaps come to ditch damaging and frankly deluded binary stereotypes, because the female experience is variable, highly plastic, and refuses to conform to archaic stereotypes. And perhaps the more we appreciate that fact, the more we will understand the natural world and perhaps empathise with one another as humans. Thank you very much. There you go.